Jomo Kenyatta was a Kenyan anti-colonial activist and politician who governed Kenya as its prime minister from 1963 to 1964, and then as its first president from 1964 to his death in 1978. He was the country's first president and played a significant role in the transformation of Kenya from a colony of the British Empire into an independent republic. He led the Kenya African National Union Party from 1961 until his death. Jomo Kenyatta was born to Kikuyu farmers in Kiambu, British East Africa. Kenyatta was born with the name Kamau in the small rural village of Ngenda. Birth records were not kept among the Kikuyu, and Kenyatta's date of birth is not known. One biographer, Jules Archer, suggested he was likely born in 1890 or 1891, although a fuller analysis by Jeremy Morrow Brown suggested a birth cycle 1897 or 1898. Kenyatta's father was named Mugai and his mother Wambi. They lived in a homestead near River Tiririka, where they raised crops and bred sheep and goats. Mugai was sufficiently wealthy that he could afford to keep several wives, each living in a separate nyumba, also known as women's hut. Kenyatta was raised according to traditional Kikuyu custom and belief, and was taught the skills needed to head the family flock. When he was 10, his earlobes were pierced to mark his transition from childhood. Kamau became seriously ill with jigger infections in his feet and on one leg when he was about 10 years of age, and he underwent successful surgery at a newly established Church of Scotland mission. This was his initial contact with Europeans. Fascinated with what he had seen during his recuperation, Kamau ran away from home to become a resident pupil at the mission. He studied the Bible, English, mathematics and carpentry, and paid his fees by working as a houseboy and cook for an European settler. In August 1914, he was baptized with the name Johnstone Kamau. He was one of the earliest of the Kikuyu to leave the confines of his own culture, and like many others, Kenyatta soon left the mission life for the urban attraction of Nairobi. There, he secured a job as a clerk in the public work department, and he also adopted the name Kenyetta, the Kikuyu term for a fancy belt that he wore. After serving briefly as an interpreter in the High Court, Kenyetta transferred to a post with the Nairobi Town Council. After this time, he married and began to raise a family. The first African political protest movement in Kenya against the white settler-dominated government began in 1921. The East Africa Association, led by an educated young Kikuyu named Harituku. Kenyatta joined the following year. One of the East's main purposes was to recover Kikuyu land laws when Kenya became a British Crown colony in 1920. The Africans were disposed. Leaseholds of lands were restricted to white settlers, and native reservations were established. In 1925, the East African Association disbanded as a result of government pressures, and its members reformed as the Kikuyu Central Association, KCA. 3 years later, Kenyatta became the organization's general secretary, though he had to give up his municipal job as a consequence. In 1928, Kenyatta launched a monthly Kikuyu language newspaper called Mwigithania, meaning he who brings together, which was aimed at gaining support from all sections of the Kikuyu. The paper was mild in tone, preaching self-improvement, and was tolerated by the government. But soon, a new challenge appeared. The British Commission recommended a closer union of the 3 East African territories, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanganyika. British settler leaders supported the proposal, expecting that internal self-government might follow. In February 1929, Kenyatta went to London to testify against the scheme. But in London, the Secretary of State for Colonies refused to meet with him. In March 1930, Kenyatta wrote an eloquent letter in the Times of London setting out 5 issues championed by the KCA. Security of land tenure and the return of land allotted to European settlers, increased educational facilities, repeal of hard taxes on women, which forced some women to earn money by prostitution, African representations in the Legislative Council, and non-interference with traditional customs. He concluded by saying that the lack of these measures must inevitably result in a dangerous explosion, the one thing all sane men wish to avoid. Kenyatta did manage to testify on behalf of Kikuyu land claims in 1932 at hearing of the Carter Land Commission. The commission decided to offer compensation for some appropriated territories but maintained the White Highlands policy, which restricted the Kikuyu to overcrowded reserves. During the 1930s, Kenyatta briefly joined the Communist Party, met other black nationalists and writers, and organized protests against the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. The onset of World War II temporarily cut him off from the KCA, which was banned by the Kenyan Authority as potentially subversive. Kenyatta helped organize the 5th Pan-African Congress, which met in Manchester, England, on October 1945, with Captain Nkrumah, the future leader of Ghana, was also present. Resolutions were passed and plans discussed for mass nationalist movement to demand independence from colonial rule. Kenyatta returned to Kenya in September 1946 to take up leadership of the newly formed Kenyan African Union, of which he was elected president in June 1945 from the Kenyan African Teachers College, which he directed as an alternative to government educational institutions, but he had to produce tangible results in return for the allegiance of his followers. The dangerous explosion among the Kikuyu that he had predicted in 1930 erupted at the Mau Mau Rebellion in 1952, which was directed against the presence of European settlers in Kenya and their ownership of land. In October 1952, Kenyatta was arrested on charges of having directed the Mau Mau movement. In April 1953, Kenyatta was sentenced to a 7 years imprisonment for managing the Mau Mau terrorist organization. He denied the charge then and afterward, maintaining that the Kenyan African Union's political activities were not directly associated with Mau Mau violence. In a press conference, Kenyatta promised that Europeans would find a place in future Kenya, provided they took their place as ordinary citizens. Kenyatta was released in August 1961, and at the London Conference early in 1962, he negotiated the constitutional terms leading to Kenya's independence. In spite of his imprisonment by the British authorities, one of the more pro-British of African leaders, Kenyatta made Kenya the most stable black African country and one of the most economically dynamic. Kenyatta died at Mombasa in 1978.